As a cruel joke, they sent the infertile alien princess to a human. Then she came back with a child. The convoy did not slow down when it reached the edge of the human settlement. It simply stopped, and they threw her out. Not literally, they were not that cruel, or maybe they were just cautious about damaging the diplomatic packaging. But the door of the transport opened, a single bag was placed at her feet, and the escort commander, a broad-shouldered Veth male with polished scales and cold eyes, said only, "Your new home, princess." Then the door closed and the convoy moved on without a sound. Lurel stood at the edge of a dirt road in a place called Clover Falls, Montana. The air smelled like pine needles and something damp. The sky was a color she had no word for, not the pale gray of her homeworld, not the orange of the colony stations, but a deep and endless blue that made her feel exposed in a way she did not like. She picked up her bag. She did not cry. She had decided on the long journey here that she would not give them the satisfaction of her tears. She had been sent here as a joke. That was the truth, stripped of all the diplomatic language. The Veth High Council had run out of ways to quietly dispose of a princess who could not produce an heir. Lurel's condition, a rare genetic failure of the reproductive glands, had been known since her 16th cycle. She had watched the pity in her father's eyes slowly harden into embarrassment, and then into something worse. She was not useful. And in the Veth Empire, things that were not useful were discarded. But you could not simply discard a princess. There were rules, old treaties, bloodline protections that even a high council could not casually erase. So they had found a different solution. The Human Alliance had been pushing for a cultural exchange, a show of good faith between species. What better way to satisfy the humans, silence the old treaty protections, and remove Lurel from the picture all at once? She had overheard 2 council aides laughing about it the night before she left. "They are sending the barren one to the dirt farmers," one had said. "Let her spend her days among creatures who barely understand the stars." The other had laughed. "Even the humans will not want her when they learn what she is." She had stood in the hallway for a long time after that. Now she was here in a human town so small it did not appear on most galactic maps. Population 412 according to the data chip she had been given. Primary industry, farming and livestock. Nearest major city, 3 hours by vehicle. The data chip had not included anything about what she was supposed to do once she arrived, or where she was supposed to go. That had been intentional, she was sure. She started walking. The road was unpaved for the first half-mile, which surprised her. She had read about human settlements, but the reading had not prepared her for the particular quality of silence here. The way the wind moved through the tall grass beside the road, the sound of something she could not identify calling from the trees. She was used to the hum of recycled air systems and the low vibration of energy cores. This silence felt alive in a way that unsettled her. She was still trying to identify the calling sound when she nearly walked into a fence. "Whoa there!" The voice came from the other side of the fence, a human male, mid-30s by the look of him, wearing clothes stained with what she hoped was mud. He was tall by human standards, with dark hair pushed back from his forehead and a face that had clearly spent a great deal of time in weather. He was looking at her with an expression she recognized, because it was the same expression everyone used when they first saw a Veth in person. Surprise, quickly masked by an attempt to appear calm. "You all right?" he asked. "I am functional," she said. Her translator chip rendered her words into the local dialect, but she was aware her phrasing was formal. She had learned human language from textbooks. He looked at her bag, then at the road behind her, then back at her. "You the exchange visitor they were talking about, from the council program?" "Yes." He nodded slowly. "I'm Cole Merritt." He held out his hand. She looked at it. She knew the gesture, she had read about it. She shifted her bag to her other hand and shook his. His grip was firm and brief, and he did not flinch at the coolness of her skin, which she appreciated. "Lurel," she said. "That's a nice name." He said it simply, without performing the compliment. You looking for the community hall? They were supposed to set up a room for you. I do not know where the community hall is. Yeah, they probably forgot to send you a map. He unlatched the fence gate. Come on, I'll walk you over. I was heading that way anyway. She followed him because she had no better option, and also because he had not yet said anything unkind. That put him ahead of most people she had met in the last 3 months. Cole walked at an easy pace and did not fill the silence with nervous talk, which she appreciated more than he could know. He pointed out the feed store, the small medical clinic, the bakery that doubled as the town's only restaurant before 6 in the evening. He spoke about these things the way someone spoke about a place they genuinely liked, not with the exaggerated pride of performance, but with simple familiarity. How long are you here for? He asked. The exchange agreement is for 1 standard year, she said. After that, it is open-ended. He glanced at her. Open-ended meaning they haven't decided yet, or open-ended meaning you don't want to go back. She was surprised by the directness of the question. I have not decided yet, she said, which was true and also far less than the truth. The community hall was a low building with a porch and 2 windows that needed new glass. A woman named Donna, who managed the town's guest accommodation with aggressive efficiency, showed Laurel to a room that was small but clean, with a window that faced east and a bed that was softer than anything she had slept on in the past year. There was a kettle and a shelf of books, and a quilt in a pattern of interlocking triangles that Donna said her grandmother had made. When Donna left, Laurel sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself, for a few minutes, to feel the full weight of where she was and how she had gotten here. Then she unpacked her bag, set her data chip on the small table by the window, and went to find out if the bakery was still open. It was. Cole was there, sitting at the counter with a cup of something that smelled like burned earth and comfort, and he looked up when she came in and said, "Coffee," with the ease of someone who had not decided she was a problem yet. "Yes," she said, "thank you." She sat 2 stools away, because she had learned that humans valued a certain amount of personal space in initial encounters, and the woman behind the counter, young, with braided hair and a direct gaze, poured coffee without asking how she took it, and then put a small pitcher of cream beside the cup, which Laurel thought was a very thoughtful thing to do. Outside, the blue sky had turned orange and then purple, and the first stars were appearing in a sky so clear it seemed impossible. She had been told Earth's skies were beautiful. The telling had not been enough. She wrapped both hands around the cup and looked at the window and thought, well, so this is where I am. She did not know yet that this was also, in all the ways that mattered, where she was supposed to be. Cole Merritt had lived in Clover Falls his entire life except for 4 years at an agricultural college in Missoula, which he had completed, and 2 years working for a resource management firm in Denver, which he had quit. People in town occasionally asked him why he had come back, and he always said something about the land, which was true but not the whole truth. The whole truth was more complicated and had to do with belonging, with the particular feeling of being in a place where the hills had a shape you recognized from childhood, and the seasons followed a rhythm your body already knew. He was not a complicated man, but he was not a simple one either. He read widely, he listened more than he talked, and he had a habit of paying attention to things that other people walked past. He paid attention to Laurel. Not in an intrusive way. He had been raised with enough good sense to know the difference between interest and imposition. But he noticed things. He noticed that she walked every morning before the town was fully awake, going down to the creek and standing there for a long time watching the water. He noticed that she returned her library books early and always left a small folded note inside the front cover with her thoughts on what she had read, because she had apparently not realized this was unusual. He noticed that when the Garfield twins had their birthday party in the community hall and the noise became overwhelming, she slipped outside and stood in the parking lot looking at the sky, and when he followed her out 15 minutes later, she said, without turning around, "I could hear you coming. Your footstep pattern is distinctive." Is that a polite way of saying I'm loud? He asked. No, it is an accurate way of saying you walk like someone who owns the ground they stand on. She paused. I think it is a good thing. He leaned against the wall beside her. How are you finding it here? Strange, she said, but good strange. Most places I have been, strange is not good. He understood that, even without knowing the details. He had seen the way she held herself in the first weeks, like someone waiting to be told they had done something wrong. That posture had slowly changed. It was not gone entirely, but it was loosening. He did not push for information she did not offer. He learned over time what she was willing to share. She was a princess. She mentioned this once flatly, as a fact rather than a status, the way someone might mention they had once lived in a different city. Her people had sent her here. She did not elaborate on why, and he did not ask. He had gathered enough to understand that whatever the reason, it had not been kindness. What he learned instead was the shape of who she was when she was not performing anything. She was precise and observant. She had opinions about everything and shared them without apology. She found human expressions confusing and asked about them directly, and she remembered every explanation he gave. She was teaching herself to bake using a book from the library, and she approached it with the focused intensity of someone solving a problem, which it sort of was. By the third month she had become a regular at the farm. Not by any formal arrangement, it had simply evolved, the way things in small towns did. She had asked during one of their evening coffee conversations whether she could see how a working farm operated, because she had been reading about agriculture, and the books were not the same as seeing. He had said yes, of course, and she had shown up the next morning at 6 with practical boots she had ordered online, and a willingness to do whatever was asked of her that had surprised everyone who had expected her to observe from a distance. She was not afraid of hard work. She learned quickly. She asked questions that were sometimes so precisely aimed at the center of a problem that his farmhand Pete would stop what he was doing and look at her with something approaching respect. She's not what I expected, Pete said one afternoon, in the way people said things they thought were compliments. What did you expect? Cole asked. Pete thought about it. Someone who would look at all this and feel like it was beneath her. Cole watched Luril across the yard, where she was methodically checking the irrigation line with a focus that suggested she had already identified something the rest of them had missed. Yeah, he said, she's not that. What he did not say was that he had stopped thinking of her as a visitor somewhere around week 6. What he did not say was that the evenings on the porch had become the part of the day he looked forward to most, when they drank whatever she was experimenting with. She had moved from coffee to herbal infusions to, inexplicably, a very successful batch of spiced cider, and talked about everything and nothing with an ease he had not found with many people. He was careful with himself. He was aware that she had arrived here from a situation that sounded, in its broad outlines, like something designed to diminish her. He was aware that she was from an entirely different world, in both the literal and figurative sense. He was aware that caring too much too quickly would be a kind of pressure she did not need. So he was careful, and the months passed. And the careful thing he was managing became more and more difficult to manage. It was Luril who said it first, which should not have surprised him but did. They were sitting on the porch steps in October, the sky full of stars, a blanket across her legs because the temperature had dropped in a way that her Veth physiology found uncomfortable even though she refused to complain about it. I want to tell you something, she said, and I'm not sure how to say it in a way that is not alarming. Try anyway, he said. She turned to look at him. Her eyes, in the dark, reflected the stars with an uncanny clarity that he had gotten used to but still found remarkable. I am not here because I want to be an exchange visitor. I am here because my people did not know what else to do with a princess who could not give them an heir. They sent me here as a disposal solution. I think they expected me to be miserable, and I think part of them expected me to fail. She paused. I am telling you this because you deserve to know the truth of who is sitting on your porch steps. He was quiet for a moment, "Thank you for telling me," he said. "Does it change anything for you being here?" "It did not change why I arrived, but it has changed what I think about arriving." She looked back at the sky. "I have been thinking that it is possible to be discarded by people who did not understand your value and to end up exactly where you were supposed to be." He looked at her for a long time. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think that might be exactly right." The following week, on a Tuesday with no particular significance, she told him she thought she was in love with him, in the same direct, unapologetic way she said everything. And he told her that he was fairly certain he was in love with her too, and they sat with that for a while before he reached over and took her hand, and she did not pull away. What neither of them knew, and what no Veth geneticist had ever told her, because the research had never been done, was that the specific genetic incompatibility that caused infertility among the Veth was not a universal incompatibility. It was species-specific, and the human genome, with its remarkable and often bewildering adaptability, did not share the same limitation. It would be 4 more months before she knew. And 7 months after that before she would board a transport back to Veth space, with Cole beside her and a daughter in her arms, and a letter from a human doctor in her bag that explained, in very precise scientific language, what no one in the Veth Empire had ever thought to check. She had spent the night before the journey sitting on the porch steps one last time, the baby sleeping against her chest, Cole's hand warm on her back, the Montana stars above them in all their uncountable abundance. "Are you ready?" he had asked. "No," she said, "but I am going anyway. There is a difference." He had smiled at that. He had been doing a lot of smiling lately, and she had found that she had stopped bracing herself against it, the way she had braced against warmth for most of her life. She let it reach her now. She had learned, in this small town at the edge of a dirt road, that you could learn to let things reach you without them destroying you. The transport lifted at dawn, and below them, the land that had saved her grew small and then disappeared into cloud, and she held her daughter against her heart and thought about what it meant to return somewhere not as someone who had been thrown away, but as someone who had found exactly what they were worth. The Veth High Council convened in the Hall of Accord, which was the oldest building in the capital city and smelled of minerals and age. The 9 council members arranged themselves in the arc of high-backed chairs that their predecessors had occupied for 600 years, and they received the news the way powerful people usually received unexpected news, with a silence that was trying very hard to look composed. Councillor Davin cleared his throat first. "She is coming back." "So we are informed," said Councillor Preth, whose family had been among the loudest supporters of the exchange arrangement. With a human male, Davin set the message paper down, and a child. The silence shifted quality. It was no longer trying to look composed. It was simply startled. "That is not possible," said Councillor Yith, who was 93 years old and had spent 40 of those years in the medical sciences. "The genetic literature is unambiguous. The reproductive failure in her line is evidently not universal." Preth was reading the medical report now, the one Laurel had transmitted ahead of her arrival, with an attention to detail that suggested she had known this moment would come and had prepared accordingly. "The incompatibility is species-specific. It functions between Veth pairings. It does not appear to function as a barrier in cross-species reproduction when the secondary species carries a sufficiently divergent chromosome architecture." He set the report down. "The humans have a remarkably adaptable genome." Yith took the report and read it herself, and the expression on her face moved through several stages that were uncomfortable to watch. The hall was quiet except for the low hum of the climate systems. Cole had been briefed before they landed on what to expect. Laurel had not sugar-coated it. "They will be formal," she had said. "They will be polite in a way that contains no actual warmth. They will look at you as though you are something they need to categorize." She had looked at him steadily. "I want you to know that none of their opinions about you are opinions I share." "I know that," he had said. "I'm not worried about me, I'm worried about you." She had considered this. I am not the person who left here. I want them to see that. I think it is important that they see that. She had been right. Even Cole, who did not know the Veth Council from anyone, could see the difference in how she carried herself when she walked into that hall. She had walked into the community hall in Clover Falls on her first night looking like someone who expected to be told they were in the wrong place. She walked into the Hall of Accord looking like someone who had come to deliver a message. She presented the medical documentation first. Then the birth record, filed with both the Human Civil Registry and the Galactic Diplomatic Office, which meant it carried legal weight across both jurisdictions. Then the formal claim for her daughter's recognition under the old bloodline protections, the same protections that had technically kept Lurel from being disposed of more directly, and which now extended to cover the next generation. The council could not refuse. The paperwork was airtight. Lurel had spent 4 months with a very good human lawyer and a very thorough human doctor, and she had made sure that every document was exactly what it needed to be. Counselor Preth, who had once quietly approved the exchange arrangement, looked at the stack of papers in front of him with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral. The council acknowledges the documentation, he said, and the claim. And my daughter's standing, Lurel said. It was not a question. A pause. And the child standing, yes. The child in question was awake and paying attention to the chamber's ceiling with the focused curiosity she applied to most things. She had her father's dark hair and her mother's silver-gray eyes, and she was, by any measure, entirely herself. Cole stood beside Lurel without fidgeting, which she had been grateful for during the weeks they had practiced what this moment might look like. He had a particular stillness that she had come to love, the stillness of someone who was fully present, not absent. He was reading the room, she could tell, filing away observations, doing the same thing she had once watched him do with his land, simply paying close attention. After the formal session, when they were waiting in one of the side rooms for the transport clearance papers, one of the younger council aides, barely out of training, too young to have participated in the original arrangement, approached them with the careful posture of someone who had been sent to perform a task they personally found uncomfortable. On behalf of the council, the aide said, a formal expression of welcome is extended to the ambassador's family. Lurel accepted this with an evenness she had spent a long time building. Thank you, she said. Please convey to the council that the ambassador's family is glad to be received. When the aide left, Cole leaned slightly toward her. Ambassador, he said quietly. The diplomatic office confirmed it this morning, she said. First cross-species liaison in either galactic registry. It requires a title. She glanced at him. The paperwork is enormous. I thought you should know. He looked at her for a moment. Then he smiled, and it was the same smile he had used on the porch in Clover Falls, which was the same smile that had, over time, reached through every defense she had ever built and simply made itself at home. You've been busy, he said. I have been preparing, she said. There is a difference. Their daughter made a sound that was neither crying nor laughing, but something in between, and Lurel shifted her and the child settled and looked at the ceiling again with her silver-gray eyes, and outside the chamber windows, the Veth capital sprawled in all its ancient geometric beauty under a sky the color of pale stone. The council had sent her away as something they did not want. She had come back as something they did not have a category for, which was, Lurel thought, considerably better. Categories were cages. She had lived in enough of them. In the weeks that followed, the story spread. It was the nature of diplomatic circles. Information moved through them like water through stone, slow but inevitable. By the time the medical report had been formally entered into the Galactic Scientific Registry, it had already become something people discussed. And by the time the Galactic Scientific Registry had triggered 3 separate research teams to begin studying the specific chromosomal dynamics involved, the story had escaped the diplomatic circles entirely and was moving through the wider galactic community in the way remarkable things moved. With speed, and with the particular energy of something that changed what people thought was possible. The research, when it was eventually published, was careful and precise, and did not use the word miracle. But it confirmed, across 23 separate trials with willing participants from both species, that Lurel's case was not an anomaly. The incompatibility was real but bounded, and the human genome, in its extraordinary, stubborn, remarkable adaptability, simply did not recognize the limitation as applying to itself. The lead researcher on the Veth side was a young geneticist named Kale, who had grown up reading about the old incompatibility as settled science. She submitted her final report with a cover note that was more personal than scientific. It said, in part, that the most important thing she had learned in 2 years of research was that the absence of evidence was not the same as evidence of absence, and that fields of inquiry sometimes stayed closed not because the door was locked, but because no one had tried the handle. She dedicated the paper to a princess who had been sent to the dirt farmers and had come back with a key. The farm in autumn was a different animal from the farm in summer. The light came in at a lower angle, and everything it touched turned a color between gold and rust, and the air had a bite to it that Cole said was the mountain coming down to remind you of its presence. He had a way of talking about landscape that made Lurel think he had been speaking a language she recognized before she had words for it. She had been back for 3 months. The diplomatic schedule was less demanding than she had expected, or rather, she had structured it to be less demanding than it could have been, because she had spent enough of her life inside obligations that left no room for living. She was in Clover Falls for 2 weeks out of every 6, and she had learned to be fierce about protecting that time. Cole had come with her on the last 2 trips to the Veth capital, and he was, in her private estimation, the best diplomat she had ever seen, which was funny because he would have refused the title absolutely. He simply treated everyone he met with the same direct, attentive, unpretentious interest that he had turned on her the evening she nearly walked into his fence. It turned out this approach worked remarkably well across species lines. Counselor Yith had cornered him at a reception in the 2nd trip, which Lurel had observed from across the room with the focused attention of someone watching something that might need intervention at any moment. Yith was 93, formidable, and had spent 40 years working within systems that Lurel associated with the worst days of her life. Cole had listened to whatever Yith was saying. He had asked a question. Yith had looked startled, then thoughtful, then had said something at some length. Cole had nodded and asked another question. By the end of it, Yith had looked at him with an expression that Lurel, in all her years of navigating Veth court politics, had never once seen on Yith's face. It looked like respect. "What did you say to her?" Lurel had asked later. "She was explaining the old incompatibility research," Cole said. "The original study. I asked who funded it, and she said the council, and I asked whether anyone had ever studied the question from outside the council's interests, and she kind of went quiet for a bit." He paused. "Then she said that was a very good question and that she was going to think about it." Lurel had looked at him. "You may have just influenced a shift in the scientific research structure of the Veth capital." "I just asked a question." "Yes," she said, "that is what I mean." Now, on the farm in October, she was doing what she did when she needed to think clearly, which was work. The irrigation line that she had first diagnosed 2 years ago had been fully replaced over the summer, and she was going over the new installation with the same focused attention she had always given to things that mattered. Pete was working the far side of the yard. Cole was somewhere in the barn. The baby, 11 months old, newly walking in the tottering, determined way of someone who has identified a goal and intends to reach it regardless of obstacles, was in the carrier on Lurel's back, occasionally patting her shoulder as though in encouragement. Her name was Mara. She had been named after a word in an old Earth language that meant of the sea, which Lurel had chosen because she had stood on the Montana shore of a mountain lake one afternoon and thought that if you could grow up learning to love something that enormous and that beautiful without being afraid of it, You would be all right. Cole had agreed without needing to understand all of the reasoning, which was another thing she loved about him. Pete came across the yard. Line's good on the east side, he said. You find anything on the west? A small misalignment in the joint at marker 3, she said. It is not urgent, but it should be fixed before the ground freezes. Pete nodded, making a note. He had stopped being surprised by her assessments sometime around the end of her first month at the farm. Now he simply incorporated them, the way you incorporated any reliable tool into your work. Cole came out of the barn with a look on his face that she had learned to recognize as the look he wore when he was trying to decide whether something was good news or complicated news. Message from the diplomatic office, he said. They want you at the Interspecies Summit in February. I know, she said. I already confirmed. He paused. The full summit, 6 weeks. She turned from the irrigation line. Yes. That's the longest yet. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her with the attentive, honest directness that had never once been a performance. How do you feel about it? She considered the question, which deserved a real answer. I feel that it is the right thing to do, she said. I feel that someone should be in those rooms who understands what it costs to be sent somewhere as a solution to a problem, and who can say something true about it. She paused. And I feel that 6 weeks is a long time, and I will miss this place, and I will miss you. We could come, he said, Mara and me. You have the farm. Pete can manage 2 weeks, maybe 3. He looked at her steadily. And I'm not going to pretend I'm fine with 6 weeks when I'm not. This was something else she had learned in 2 years, about letting things reach her. It included letting people be honest about what they needed. She had spent so long among people who treated their needs as weapons that the experience of someone simply stating a truth without arming it was still, sometimes, startling. Come for 3 weeks, she said. Bring Pete if he wants to see the Capitol. Cole smiled. Pete will absolutely want to see the Capitol. Mara patted her shoulder again, and Laurel reached back and took the small hand for a moment and held it, and the Montana afternoon moved around them in its golden, slow October way. She thought about the aide who had called her an ambassador. She thought about the research paper dedicated to a princess sent to the dirt farmers. She thought about the convoy that had stopped at the edge of a dirt road 2 years ago and thrown her out, and about how, if you mapped every moment between that morning and this one, the line between them was not straight, but it was real, and it had led here. Here, which was an irrigation line, and a baby and a man with honest eyes, and a farm that smelled like hay and cold air, and the particular kind of peace that comes from being exactly where you are supposed to be. She had come back with a child, but she had come back with more than that. She had come back with a life she had built from the thing they thought would humiliate her, and she had built it so well that they were having to restructure their understanding of what was possible. The council had sent her away as a joke. The joke was on them, but she did not think of it that way. She had stopped finding satisfaction in their discomfort somewhere around the 7th month, when she had realized that their opinions were simply no longer the unit of measurement she was using. She was measuring in different things now, in irrigation lines correctly laid, in evenings on porch steps, in a baby's first steps across a kitchen floor, in a question asked by a man who treated everyone with the same honest attention and somehow, in doing so, changed things. The Galactic Summit would begin in February. She had 2 months, and she intended to use them well. The sun was getting low, and the light on the hills was the color of old gold, and Pete was whistling something tuneless from across the yard, and Cole was walking toward her with 2 cups of coffee, and her daughter was saying something in the half-formed sounds that preceded real words, something that might have been the beginning of language, or might have been simply the sound of a person discovering they had a voice. Laurel reached for the cup Cole held out. Their fingers touched briefly. He did not look at her like she was a problem to be solved, or a resource to be evaluated, or a disappointment to be managed. He looked at her the way he looked at his land, with the settled, clear-eyed recognition of someone who knew exactly what they had and understood its worth. She had been thrown out of a transport onto a dirt road in Montana, and it had turned out to be the best thing that had ever happened to her. Not because suffering was good or humiliation was secretly a gift. She did not believe in that particular kind of comfort, but because sometimes the place where people discard you is the place where you discover what you are actually made of. And sometimes the people who receive what others have thrown away are the ones who know how to see it clearly. The coffee was warm. The air smelled like pine in coming winter. Above the hills, the first star was appearing in a sky so blue it was almost violet. She drank the coffee. She held her daughter's small hand. She stood on a farm in Montana and was, without any qualification or reservation, exactly where she was supposed to be. That was the end of the joke, and the beginning of everything else.